Let's look into PHP functions. So what a function is, how many types of functions we have in PHP, and how to define them and use it in our programs. And this particular section is mostly focused on user defined functions, and the user defined functions for each and every concept, individual concepts will be discussed in later on different sessions. As of now, first and first, what is a function? Function is a block of code where you will be executing some statements, okay, which does a particular task for us, because each application has its own functionalities, to implement whenever it is called, and this particular block of code executes that functionality for us. And PHP offers two types of such functions for us. The first one is a built-in function, which comes along with the PHP installation, or which comes along with the PHP package which you have on your system when you're running your PHP code. And these functions, these are designed by the PHP developers itself, okay, focusing on most frequently used functionalities using PHP. Example of such functions are key sort. It is a key sort of an array. You can sort out all the elements of an array based on its key value. And you can also have var underscore dump, even which you use this to on the arrays to list out the array structure and how what array is completely composed of. And there's also one more function called as unset, where you can unset the post variable or get variable or a session variable. Whenever you want to unset a created variable, you can use this function. Along with this, PHP offers more than 1000 functions, built-in functions, which can be accessed from within the PHP library, and you can refer to each one of them on the official PHP.NET documentation. And the second type of functions are user-defined functions, and these functions are, as the name implies, developed by the application developers for performing some specific task. And this task, for example, as I have listed here, calculate interest is a user-defined function which will calculate the interest whenever it is called. Whenever I call the function to calculate the interest at any point of time, for example, if I am designing a very big application for a banking institute or a financial institute, often I need to calculate the interest for different accounts. So this is what I do using a user defined function. Also, you can print a result, or you can generate some reports out of some dynamic database driven reports out of PHP using user defined functions. So for example, I want to generate a dynamic report which which generates the report out of the data from database, based on the different requirements of the different users. I want to generate it. I want to generate a report which shares a common template. Every time I want to generate this, I need not have to call one line of code for that. So it is just okay for me if I go ahead and have a common function which does this job for me. And this function, when is initialized? So a function itself cannot do anything. A function itself is just some lines of code on your file, that's it. But this function does the job only when it is called. A function gets loaded only when it is called, and we call that statement as a calling statement or the calling value. So this whenever you make a call, this function does something, so which is already predefined within the function definition. And what are the benefits of using functions in your applications? The first one is reusability. So any particular task, any code you write to accomplish a particular task, if you want to reuse the same functionality again with the minor changes, so you can use this function so that your code is reusable. Okay, your code, you can conserve a lot of time, you can conserve a lot of effort having a reusable code. And the second most important thing on this aspect is the code is completely maintainable. Maintainable in the sense, maintainability gives you total control on the development of the code, also on your testing, debugging, deploying, and putting the application in place. So in future, for example, if you need a major upgrade on a particular task or a particular functionality of the application, this functionality may be referred a couple of times in your application. So anytime if there is such type of change, you need not have to go to individual package or individual file and make the changes to each and every file. It is just okay for you if you just open the function, change the function, put it live, get it done. So that's as simple as it is. And next, how these functions look like. So okay, now I understand what a function is and how I can use a user defined function in PHP. But how to start? How can I create a function, and how does it look? And generally, as I told you, this function, as I told, which is a block of code, a reusable and maintainable code, this code gets started within a curly brace and gets closed with a closing curly brace. This implies a complete functional block. And this function also has some arguments or parameters which you will be passing at the time of initiating the function or calling the function. These arguments are not always mandatory. You can also have a function without passing any arguments, but most of the times to have your customized implementation of your function, you can pass these arguments to the function, and then you will be having the executable block of code, whatever the PHP code you have inside that. What is this particular function intended to do? That will be having inside the executable block code there. And finally, you need to make a call to this defined function using the name of the function along with the optional parameters based on the requirement of the scenario. This is what we call it as a function call. And what does this function do after making a function call? So as we discussed, this function does some executable job for us, and after performing this executable job, it's the responsibility of this function to do or to respond with something else. So how does this function respond? The first type is either the function can directly give us the next level of the output, or it can take us to the next level of the application. That is part one, that is one choice. And the second thing is, after doing, for example, I want to make a database call to get some results out from the database. So once I make a function call, this function should be able to give me the results back. This is what I call as returning the result back to me, and I can operate on the result returned back by the function. So now we are going to see how we are going to achieve all this stuff on the following practice. We are going to practice a couple of programs, and we are going to see how PHP can do this for us. Okay, and before that, don't forget to just get opted for our complete course on PHP from Selfpaced Tech, which will give you a lot of live interactive sessions, and you can also get the full lifetime access to all our course material, recordings and videos, along with a lot of challenging and interesting practice assignments. And we do have a lot more stuff packed in for you. Let's get join in Selfpaced Tech to access the best out of this course. And coming back to the programs and how we can implement these functions inside the PHP block using PHP functions. So I have created a file on my code editor called as functions.php, and this is basically a PHP block of code. So first, let me write a function which calculates area. So let me say this function as print underscore area of a rectangle. So this time I want to print the area of a rectangle, and this function accepts two parameters to calculate the area. The first parameter should be the length, and the second parameter should be the breadth variable. So length and breadth are the variables which are being expected by this function, which will, after receiving this particular length and breadth parameters or arguments from the user, this is going to print back the area on the screen. So now, after receiving the length and breadth, I just want to echo the area of rectangle is length into breadth. So let me calculate length into breadth by just multiplying both the variables. So length into breadth. And now I am done with defining the function. The function has been executed, the function definition has been completed. I have saved the file, but still I cannot see any output of this file because I have not called this function. So now, coming out of the block, I need to call this function. So just by saying the name of the function, print underscore area, along with some data, that is my length and breadth. But as of now, I want to give 12 as my length and 10 as the breadth of my rectangle. And now let me save it, and when I execute this, you can see it prints back the area of the rectangle is 120. Okay, so now this is how you can print the area of a rectangle on the screen. And what if you are not passing any variables, any arguments? If you are not passing to this method, what happens to the output? So let me refresh this. After saying, you can get a couple of warning messages over there which says that the arguments are missing because this function is expecting two parameters, and this function call is actually not passing these arguments to the function. So we have a catch for this. So we can have some default length and breadth. Even if the user is not giving any length and breadth, what I can do is I can just have some default lengths and breadth. For example, I can give the length as 10 and the breadth as 10 within the function definition itself. I am initializing them with some default values and I am saving it. So once I define this and I refresh it, I can get the value as 100 even if I am not passing any arguments. So this time let me pass some arguments. For example, this time I am passing 12 and 10. So what happens now? So this will just print back 120, which is the product of 12 and 10, which means that whenever you are calling this function with the values, with the arguments, that is going to override the existing values over there. So if you are not passing any values, it is going to just take whatever is present there. For example, let me not pass only one variable, 10. And if I refresh, you can see it is still 100 because one value is coming 10 and the other value is still 10 there. The breadth is still there, 10 there. For example, let me say I am passing 30 from here. So the first value is 30 and the second value is still 10 there and it prints me 300 there. So this is in this particular function, what happening is the function itself is printing the value there. Sometimes I may not like this. I don't want this to happen. So as soon as I call the function, I just want the function return me some value so that outside the function I can use that variable to print back the result. For example, so this time let me rewrite the same function. Instead of print area, this time I want to name this function as return area. And the same thing, the scenario does not change here, and instead of echo, I use a return keyword. And this return keyword just returns the calculated value. So even if I am calling the return area function along with the parameters, this time let me give the parameters as 20, 30 and I'm sorry, return underscore area is the name of the function. So even if I call this function, this is not going to print me any value because it's just returning the value. So I need to use this value. So now this is of type data. So this is the data. The data is there within the function. So I can use an echo statement just before this to print the area of the rectangle. I can say the area of rectangle is return area. So now if I save this, so you can see after refreshing, it gives me the area of rectangle is 600. So let us put a small line break over here. So the code will be, the output will be readable. So BR. So now if I refresh it, so the second call gives me the calculated area of the rectangle in a new line, but this time it is just printing outside. Actually the print operation is being done outside the function, and in the previous case the print is being done within the function. So that is the difference, as I told you on the previous screen. Like it's up to you, like how you want the function to do the job for you, either to do within itself, either you can have the function to do the job for you, or else you can have the function to return some value back to you and you can do the rest of the job. So this is about the functions and returning the values and how we can define some default values to the functions, even so that even if you're not passing any arguments, so the function assumes some default values and go ahead. And let us look at one more example where we are going to discuss about the type declarations. So let me remove all this stuff and refresh this. So this time on the PHP code, let me define a function called as contact. And this contact accepts an argument of type array. And let me say this array is details. And this function, now I am defining the data type within the function itself. So this is called as a type declaration within the function, and I am declaring a variable details of type array. And now what my intention is to print a table with all the values received as an array from the function call, so that each and every time I want to print the contact details, I can just make a call along with the details which I want to put it on the table, and finally I can get the output over there. So let's see how we can do that. So now I want to echo the table now of the border, let me say 1, And now each and every time I want to call this function, each and every time I am calling this function, I want to create a row, because table is standard and row is what always repeats for me. So let me say I have to use because you know that PHP variables, PHP arrays, if you want to loop through all the elements of an array, you need to use for each loop. So we can also cover this inside our array session. As of now, let us see how we are going to print this array from. And as of now, this variable, as of for this session, the variable is details. Name of the variable is details, which is an array. And with this details, I want to echo every time there is a detail inside the array, I want to echo a new table row which has a cell with the key and a cell with the value. And finally, we are closing the final cell and the row. So I have done printing the row. As long as there are elements, as long as there are keys and values inside the array, I am just printing it. And now I need to make a call to this function. So how do I call to this? How do I call this function? So this is the contacts, and to this contacts I am passing an argument of type array. And let me say the first one is name, an associative array with the key name, and the value for that is Selfpaced Tech, and then a key, sorry, this, let me say this is email. The second element is an email. Let me say info@selfpacedtech.com. Let me close it. I am done calling the function, and let us see what it returns. So I have a table with name, with some name, and with some value for that name, an email and some value for that email. So now let me say this time I also want this function to print back some other data. I'm just copying it and pasting it here. Let me give another name called as John, and email as john@selfpacedtech.com, and one more contact, Mike, and email is mike@selfpacedtech.com. I'm saving it and refreshing it. So as many times, as many calls I'm making to the function, so that many times the table is getting repeated over there. So this is how I can have a single declaration, a single method which will do the job for me, and this method is going to take care of everything. For example, I want to call this function using a database by connecting this function, or no, by connecting this particular block of code to a database, so that as long as there are rows inside the database, I want to generate a report like this. So as of now we are not using any CSS or styling for this, but if you are using any styling framework, you can have a beautiful report generated from within the database. So this database can have a dynamic data, this database can deliver any amount of data. You can make a call to a web service or an API which gives you the data, and you can print back the data on the HTML page like this. So that is a different topic which we will be discussing it in our MySQL web services construction using PHP sessions, which are covered completely inside the complete PHP course with Selfpaced Tech. So I hope you are fine and good to go with the PHP user-defined functions, and still we do have a lot of interesting topics which are covered inside our core PHP package at Selfpaced Tech, and we are waiting for you there. So I am waiting for you to catch you up there, and I'm sure that you will definitely enhance your PHP skills out there at Selfpaced Tech. Thank you.